Hey, good
Hey.
evening, folks, and welcome to COVID tonight. Trek tonight. Um, I, of course, am Chris Pitcher. To my what are you? My left is Leo Genesek, and down below Joe Townsell. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Doing great.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I'm still feeling kind of crappy, but here I am.
Yes.
So, Leo, you're better. You're better, aren't you?
I'm feeling better. I still have, it's a little bit of occasionally I get a bit of a cough and a little bit of a runny nose, but it's much better than it was last week.
Good. I've been futzing around with the show a little bit, and I'm not sure I'm crazy about this background. I'm gonna get a better one. It's really cool if we're not in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we're gone, I can't do it. I'd have to take us all out of the show. But it's the Enterprise. Oh,
well, don't have to see the Enterprise for it to be cool. Come on.
Yeah, you can't see that.
The Enterprise is in each of us.
It is, and we are in it. Yeah.
Yes.
So tonight. Oh, before we start, I wanted to talk about this goofy thing. I was telling the guys earlier. Somewhere in my attic, I have one of those TOS monitors that you would see on Captain Kirk's desk or in a conference room or what have you. And I'm dying to put it on my set, but I don't know where it is. And I was up in the attic looking through boxes, and I still didn't find it. I know it's up there, but I did find a whole box of Star Trek toys still in the box.
Ooh.
Look at that. You got Bajoran phasers and tricorders, and there's TOS communicators and everything else in there. And
Mint in box.
Yeah, and then a really terrible sculpt of Tasha Yar. This sort of looks bizarre.
It doesn't do her justice.
It does not. And it's really sad that they thought putting her actual face right next to the really bad sculpt was a good idea. Because it really points
that's
out.
how you know who it was. Otherwise, you'd be like,
yeah, I guess you'd be like, oh, who is that? Yeah.
That's probably why Denise Crosby left the show.
Yeah.
It couldn't help. It couldn't help. If you think of those early action figures that very much did not look at all like the people they were supposed to be. Even like if you look at the old Star Wars, like these original Star Wars, they're all basically the same body sculpt for the men and the women. And they would just, faces sort of look like them. Like the blonde guy was obviously Luke and the dark-haired guy was Han.
Yeah.
But, you didn't really feel like they'd done justice. There are very few action figures that do justice to the people there.
Especially at that scale. Although what's wild is the sculpts for the Mego dolls were fantastic, I thought.
They were much better. I would agree.
They really, it's like you can see that's William Shatner. I don't know.
Well, the wrists always fucking creep me out. I'm sorry. I know they just look like I don't know. Something about that just sort of like got my hackles up.
Yeah.
So,
tunic down. That's all.
Yes. So you're a little.
Yeah.
Well, is it possible that maybe some of the companies, like the one you just showed us, had rights restrictions as far as likenesses? To some extent, I don't know.
That's a good question. It's the Enterprise is in us. That's deep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely, Keith. That's not Joe Townsell checking in, guys.
That's right. Anyway, I don't know. I remember with the Star Wars figures, if you remember, they came out with that first set.
Yes.
Kind of sort of blocky and stuff. But then the second series, they decided they had to make them all muscle bound. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And so the next ones had these enormous arms, and like,
they all look like they would do you lift, bro? That's exactly what it was. There is what it's called the Black Series, which I don't have any, but I'm aware of it for Star Wars, and they put out these really beautifully detailed action figures.
Yeah.
Hello. I have a tiny alien.
I'm being invaded. Oh, and here comes Mom.
Well, we have our target audience for Prodigy with us right now.
Well, it is about Prodigy. That's true.
Yeah.
You dance at the end. We dance at the end. At the end of the show, you can dance.
That is if you don't get strangled first.
Yeah, after you get choked to death. Yeah. Well, dance afterwards.
We don't condone child abuse here.
No, we don't. We don't condone father abuse.
No patricide, please.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but there,
Evil.
the technology for action figures has gone beyond what we once knew. Sounds dirty.
Yeah.
I don't know what Craig was referring to, but I guess anything
I
sounds
think
dirty.
the father abuse. Maybe. I don't know. I have no idea.
I'm not going
And
to
It's a
judge.
wide-reaching topic.
We will call her in for the dancing, Keith. Don't
Yes.
worry. If she's not asleep, which would be an even better thing. But
Well, it's kind of like when DC and Marvel did the earlier Trek comics based on various movies.
Yeah.
It's like they drew them like superheroes almost.
right.
You could see their bulging biceps to their loose-fitting, supposedly out uniforms, and
Yeah, there was a lot of the art in those old Star Trek comics was not great, with the exception of one that was drawn by a guy named Adam Hughes. He did one which was a one-shot. It was a graphic novel, the name of which eludes me, but you can Google this.
Mm.
And he drew it. Everybody looked like who they looked like, which was remarkable. And he's also Adam Hughes is a terrific artist. So I suggest Googling that and looking up and picking it up for your collection.
Right. Yeah.
I think we're going down it's a Star Trek rabbit hole or
It is.
wormhole.
It is. And before we get too far in, I'd like to thank Donald Faulkner for giving us a thumbs up. Thank you, Donald.
Thanks, Donald.
We appreciate you watching and giving us a thumbs up. We had a lot of activity on the website this week.
Yes.
Page. A lot of people popping in and liking and commenting on the stuff that we posted. So that was really nice. Nice to see. All right, gents. We are starting, as you know, a series on Star Trek Prodigy.
Yeah.
And this is a Star Trek show clearly designed to draw a younger audience into the Star Trek universe. It is partnered between Paramount and Nickelodeon.
Yes.
And we're starting with what would be mid first season, because they ran half the first season for some reason and then stopped, and then decided to run another chunk of episodes to finish the first. I'm not sure why it's not season 1 and season 2, but do you have an idea?
I'm imagining it's because Nickelodeon would require 20 episodes to call itself a
Probably.
Nickelodeon season.
This was originally only supposed to air on Nickelodeon. It was not going to be on Plus. Excuse me.
Yeah.
For some reason, it was decided to air it on Paramount Plus. They did like the first 5 or 6 episodes, and then they brought back Discovery, and then they finished this, and then there was a bit of, it seemed jumbled to me, but I'm sure there was some executive who thought this was a brilliant idea, but we are still watching it, so I suppose it worked.
Well, and if you noticed, so they started with this new launch with episode 11, which was called Asylum. Yes. And then when they went to episode 12, it now has the new Star Trek badge opening with the protostar in it.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool. So, because when I first watched 11, I thought, oh, it doesn't have that. And I thought, well, maybe that's because they're setting it apart. And then 12, it did have it. So,
I'm not sure why.
They must have added it subsequently, because I watched them both today.
Yeah.
And both had that intro.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Interesting. Because I watched 2 episodes today too, but I didn't notice it on the first one. But you know me. I mean, right now with COVID, half the time my brain's not working anyway. So, but yeah, it's. But I did notice it specifically on episode 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely did it. And I'm glad they do. I like that as a little sort of signature, and each one having their own, ship as the featured in it. So
yeah. So now I don't know. I think we should talk about them in order. And I don't know it's going to be interesting to see what tone we set here. Are we looking at these as a Star Trek fan and an adult, or are we looking at it as this is how a show for children would be done? We can decide that as we go. And
I think we can sort of look at it both ways. I would say my feeling about the show as a whole is this is actually not a terrible way to get younger kids into Star Trek, because Star Trek is a little headier. It is not it's not as action orientated. There's a good Star Trek episode is sometimes very talky, and it's about addressing social issues. Craig only watched episode 11 and had it in the intro. Yeah, I think they must have updated it this week.
Yeah.
So I think that making it a little more dynamic is not a bad idea. And the idea, since the crew, for spoilers for anybody who's not seen any of these shows, not sure why you'd be watching us.
Because we're so
handsome. We're charming.
We're handsome and charming.
We're handsome and charming. But is the kids are in the show starts in the Delta Quadrant, and they find this ship, which was this lost Federation ship, the Protostar, experimental spacecraft, and it's about them escaping, sort of bondage.
Bondage. Yeah.
And they're slowly getting exposed to Federation ideals and what it means to be part of Starfleet.
And the way that comes to them is through a holographic advisor, which is patterned after Captain Janeway.
Yes, who is voiced by our
Kate
Mulgrew. And that's, I think it's a good way of sort of like, I don't want to say spoon feeding because that sounds condescending, but it's like, rather than like download like 50 years of Star Trek history like on the table at once and be like, dig in. That's a lot to dig in. There's a lot of Star Trek history, a lot of Star Trek stuff.
Well, you play into exactly what John says. He says you have Janeway and a few surprises. And hi, John. Good to see you again.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and you're right. You get that Janeway core that gives you your Starfleet anchor, if you will.
Yes.
And then you get to sort of learn about the ship and about Starfleet all along with the kids.
Yeah.
And as we get into the second episode, don't let me forget to talk about kids, because I think it's when you start to see that they really are kids. But let's talk about Asylum first, because that is the first one we watched. And what did you guys think about episode 11?
I liked it. I think they're starting to take steps towards them, because their whole thing is like, we want to return the ship to Starfleet, and we want to be part of Starfleet. And this is their first like real step towards that. But of course, there is the hidden MacGuffin underneath the bulkhead, which was left by now I'm blanking on the character's name.
Who
the overseer's daughter.
Yeah, Joiner. I don't know. I've forgotten now.
Yeah,
that's why we have our commentary crew.
That's exactly right.
They'll tell us.
Yeah, it's the name of her dad, the guy who runs the prison camp, basically. Yeah. It's an ER at the end, like the Joiner, but that's not it. It's
not. It's not the Dominator, but it might as well be. Anyway, but he's the big bad from season 1,
right?
Or the first half of season 1,
right?
He's left this device that if once they contact Federation or other Starfleet ships, it'll start off a self-destruct initiative.
But no, wait a minute. We don't know that in Asylum, do we?
We do.
I thought that was the Borg episode.
No, that was in Asylum.
Oh,
because they find the furthest communication outpost.
Right.
And they put on their uniforms and,
Yeah. Right.
and, you know, and Dahl or Swile Captain is kind of feeling insecure. And he's like, I don't know, what if they see right through me? She's like, well, then they'll know what kind of person you are. He has this wonderful moment with Janeway where he hugs her because
Right.
he's this kid. He's not really Peter Pan, but he doesn't have a mother. Like he does have that. He has that absence of family.
Thank
The
you. The
diviner.
diviner.
Win. Yes.
Yeah, I knew it was something ER. Diviner. That's it.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
So they go on they contact, and there's one guy there who's a Denobulan, like junior lieutenant junior grade. I wrote his name down because it was actually a pretty good name. Find my notes.
Yeah, John gave it to us too. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Oh boy. Real professional program.
We are very professional.
We have a whole staff of people that prepare our notes for us in advance, and then we just
Barnes Frex.
That's a good name.
Sort of has run the worst assignment, shy of Starbase 80.
yeah.
I was really he greets everybody and he's like, I think he's just happy to see anybody.
Yeah, and I figured he was a Denoblian.
He's a Denobulan as like Dr. Phlox, but not nearly as sort of affable as Dr. Phlox. He's
Right.
he's a little socially awkward. But he's been we live to serve, yes. And they scan everybody, they find out, they don't know Gwen's what her race is because they've yet to be encountered by the Federation because the
Right.
diviner is from the future, if
Right.
you remember it. Rock is he's like, you want to be a rock star, and it's a very dad joke.
Yeah.
And apparently this is an alien species that was used in one of the books about Starfleet Academy, about when Worf was in Starfleet Academy.
Oh, interesting. I
Like a YA book. And Jankum Pog finds out that he's a Tellarite, and the Tellarite's one of the founders of the Federation, and he's like, I'm royalty.
I'm royalty. Yeah. He's very excited about that.
Which was a wonderful little moment for him. And
then we get this interesting bit where they recognize who come on, they recognize what race he is, but they can't say until he goes to Starfleet Command, which I don't really understand.
We don't really, again, that raises more questions than it answers, but clearly there's something special about his people or
right.
the Federation, have some unusual relationship. And unfortunately that answer we do not get that answer, but they're all sort of like feeling like, oh, this is our first step. We're gonna return the ship and we're gonna say, hey, we did some good stuff, because they kept saying they stole the ship, and they did, but they stole it from the diviner, and they didn't really. I don't think of them as like having stole it so much as sort of found it,
right?
Because it's not like they beamed over it and like
they're just self-conscious about it because they feel like they're going to get in trouble because they're kids.
Yeah, that's true. They're all kids, so kids are kind of like,
kids get in trouble when they end up with something that doesn't belong to them.
Well, how many sitcom episodes do we see over the decades where they find a wallet loaded with cash in the gutter and they're worried about it?
Right.
Yeah. So, and Zero and Gwen are trying to. Oh, okay, Philly's tied game for the World Series.
Tied game.
Nice touch, Chris.
In Houston, 1-1.
So, Zero feels very guilty about having damaged Gwen's memory.
Right.
And he said, well, the sick bay is more advanced than we have, so I think this might be able to help you.
Right.
And of course, once our erstwhile Lieutenant JG tries to download the logs off the protostar, everything starts going to hell.
Right.
And literally the station starts to attack itself. And he's flipping out, and he calls them saboteurs, and he jumps in the only escape pod, and fucks off into space.
Which I found a little bit odd that there's only one escape pod on the whole.
It does seem odd that there would be that there wouldn't.
There's only one guy.
but for dramatic sakes, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because then the rest of the crew, they have to put on spaceships, and we actually see Dahl sort of rise to the occasion as a leader.
Yeah,
And he's
because
like,
he
"Oh,
suggests they all get into vac suits and go try to get to the ship.
like
through
jump out in because Janeway can't beam them up because there's a problem with the transporter, as it often is in these sorts of situations.
right.
And they have a very exciting thing we get to see.
So we've introduced that to kids early.
It's true.
Transporters will not always save your behind.
So they do get out, and they miss the ship, and then Janeway, tractor beams them in, and it's a very very exciting. And then they realize that there's what's going on with this. There's something is strange. Like, why
Yeah.
would the
Yeah,
ship?
did that give anybody pause when she was able to tractor beam them onto the ship?
Well, no more so than some of the other inconsistencies in logic.
Well,
I mean,
the reason I say that is
Yeah.
now, of course, technologically,
yeah.
the universe has changed.
Mhm.
But I'm just thinking about how they locked a tractor beam on Captain Christopher's airplane and it crushed it.
Oh,
So I'm thinking if you lock a tractor beam on a person, I don't know.
modifiable
know.
now at this point in Starfleet history, where they can
I
adjust.
mean, this is
yeah.
at least 100 years later, and I guess tractor beams have gotten a little more
Clearly.
finessable.
Yeah.
Also, just as a little Easter egg note, at the beginning of the episode, they're rescuing this alien whale from being attacked by these alien mer people on this water planet, and they're in a little mini sub that's chasing them.
Right.
And did anybody else know the design of the mini sub remind me a little bit of the jellyfish ship that Spock flies
Yes.
in Star Trek, the J.J. Abrams, the first Star Trek film.
Yeah. Craig says here they just took an already stolen ship in order to escape slavery. And that's right. And that's I guarantee you that's how Starfleet will look at it once they understand the story, but not the way a bunch of scared kids would think.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I wanted to touch on, and I think it's even more prevalent in episode 12. But one of the things that they are doing nicely is writing them as kids. And I didn't notice it so much in episode 11 as I did in 12.
Right.
Because of the way they have to get out of whatever situation they're in.
Yes.
We'll get to that later. But they are doing a nice job with that. And I think that that's definitely a great example of that.
And also at the end of the episode, Gwen, so I guess through maybe the trauma, this sort of awakens the memory. She remembers what happened, what her father had said to her.
Right.
She realizes that the ship has a weapon on it.
Right.
And that gets addressed the next episode.
Right.
I enjoyed this episode. I'm also, let's not forget that the tracker beams have improved. Still don't have any bloody circuit breakers. If they did,
Craig would know.
it would be a much less dramatic show.
Right.
So
all right. So you guys are looking at this now, Joe. I don't know how much of this you've watched. Is this really you're dipping your toe for the first time in Prodigy?
Almost, and I'm glad you asked that, Chris. I'll tell you where I am exactly. I watched the first episode, I guess, almost a year ago when it first aired.
Right.
I did find a YouTube video a week or two ago that kind of summarized the first 10 episodes.
Okay.
Very briefly, and then I watched these two. So my exposure is even less than Lower Decks. Now, I will say this, and again, I don't mean this to sound the least bit condescending or at all. I find it a virtue, is that because Prodigy seems to be much less layered than Lower Decks, I feel as though I'm up to speed just having seen that much.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think in this case, because with Lower Decks, by contrast, I mean, I still feel like I need to play catch up in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
This one, I don't feel a need to go back and see the others, not because they wouldn't be enjoyable, but because I feel like it's a very straightforward narrative.
Right.
And it is about kids. And again, not to downplay that or to appear condescending,
right.
but it's just a more straightforward way of telling a story.
Right.
And
right.
so for what it is, I've enjoyed the two that I've seen. I can see where there's been improvement over the first half of the season. The only criticism I have, and this is probably just a personal taste issue, but I almost wish there were no human characters in it, including Janeway, in the sense that when I see the kind of the poor CG animation, it kind
Right.
of takes me out of it, especially Chakotay. I thought, I know that Chakotay has a reputation for being stiff, but this is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
We also,
Well, and I said this to Leo in the
Yeah.
green room before. I don't think you were in yet.
Uh-huh.
But I will say that I find the animation easier to watch on Lower Decks than I do on this. And one of the reasons that I suspect perhaps they may have gone with this style of animation is because it reminds me a great deal of the Clone Wars animation.
Oh yeah.
yeah,
And I have a feeling that's been done on purpose, because that does have, Star Wars has a really big child audience in their franchise. I mean, Star Wars attracts kids. And so if you're going to try to bring kids into the Star Trek universe, what better way than to make it look a little bit like Star Wars? And in the first, the pilot episode to me just reminds me so much of Star Wars.
it does.
Yeah.
It's a lot of bright colors.
Yeah.
A lot of dynamic.
Loads of
action.
aliens, lots of bright colors.
Beautiful space scenes, and the underwater
yeah.
scene at the beginning of Asylum was gorgeous too.
Yeah.
It's just when you see a human, or at least even recognizable alien, like the Andorian at one point,
Right.
it took me out of it a little bit. When I see the main character Delta kids, I said, didn't even occur to me. That's what they look like. That's what these aliens look like. When I saw the others, I said, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It is very stylized. It's funny because when we the Trill, I guess she's the helmswoman aboard the Dauntless, and we also mentioned we're getting a lot more of actual Admiral Janeway,
Right.
Vice Admiral Janeway, who's on aboard the Dauntless looking for the Protostar.
Right.
So she is very much more the Trill. The animation also reminds me of the Discovery series, just the brightness. It's true. It's much brighter, and I think that is a thing for more for kids, or at least especially for this.
Right.
But I think the sort of a slightly stylized version of Janeway, I'm like, okay, I'll buy that. Like, it's recognizable as Janeway, but it looks like the Janeway in this world versus an actual, like, authentic representation.
Right. But I do know what Joe's talking about in the character of Chakotay. Not only is he very stiff and he's very upright, but he's also, Chakotay was kind of a stocky guy. I mean, he was not a tall, skinny, lanky fellow, and he just seems so tall and slim in this now. I don't know.
He got that hero upgrade.
Keith says we are the target audience for Lower Decks, and he's right about that.
Yeah.
The target audience for Prodigy is, he's saying, my daughter, and I'm assuming you mean my 8-year-old. And what does she think of the animation? It's a very good question, and I'll have to ask her that. Keith, I don't know. I haven't talked to her about it. She's a very big fan of anime. I know that already. So I don't know what she thinks of this style of animation. I know she's watched it. And I know my 3-year-old will watch anything that is Star Trek related for all of 15 minutes. So she just loves that it's Star Trek, and then it holds her attention about as long as you can imagine a 3-year-old, watching Star Trek.
Minutes is pretty good for a 3-year-old.
I think so. She watched the Borg episode with me. So she saw almost all of that. Yeah.
Cool.
Wow.
I got to tell you there, I'll, if I can inject this here, one character I don't care to ever see again. And somebody help me out with the character name of that doctor that Admiral Janeway was with.
Oh
my God. Yeah. He's
what an insubordinate jerk.
He's horrible.
No reason.
Number one, I can't imagine him talking to a vice admiral that way. Number one.
Yeah.
And number two, yeah, he's just awful. He's like an awful person.
Okay,
He went beyond the McCoy humor being kind of a smart
Right. Yeah.
To
well,
be saying,
okay, I'll say a couple of things. His name is Dr. Noam. He is a
Okay.
Tellarite. Tellarites are notoriously argumentative.
Well, that's true.
And I would say he is part of the grand tradition of Starfleet doctors who are cantankerous and curmudgeonly.
What happens to them in Starfleet Medical? I've got to know what do they go through in Starfleet Medical that drives?
I guess the people with really good bedside manners stay in private practice. So, but I will say also that character is voiced by Jason Alexander of Seinfeld fame. So
that redeems him a bit.
He is. A lot of people. There was one review said he apparently came directly from the Jerk store, which was a nice Seinfeld reference. Yes. He is cranky, but it's also, I think doctors and commanding officers have a different relationship, because clearly he's like a senior officer and he's done a lot, and he's there like, I'm doing the best I can kind of thing, and captains are like, I need this right away. He'd be like, yes, I'll just wake him up, knowing nothing about his species at all.
Right.
Of course, the answer is, well, why don't you try this? And he's like, he's the prodigy version of Dr. Ta'ana. Dr. Ta'ana is pretty curmudgeonly too, but I guess that because the guy is a comedy, perhaps we take it. John says, yet all these new Star Trek series have interlocking nostalgia, Strange New Worlds, Picard, and of course Lower Decks that the fans get. So it might be a nod for the parents watching it with their children.
It could be, and that's something that that's very true.
He did set the standard for Starfleet doctors.
Yeah.
Somehow, though, I doubt that Kirk would have just stood there with his lips pursed, not saying anything. If McCoy said, "Well, Spock's kissing your ass," I mean,
Well,
yeah, just seemed to go a little bit beyond the limit for my taste.
McCoy said a lot of really questionable things. He was like there was a lot of casual racism out of Dr. McCoy.
Yeah.
In regards to Spock, calling him a green-blooded hobgoblin and so on.
Good reminder for me, Chris. Leo,
nowadays, we get him a quick trip to the HR department.
Right.
But, different times. So I enjoyed the episode. I think it's setting up the arc for this season, which is them wanting to, they want to try to get rid of this thing that's on the ship, which they haven't discovered as of the first episode. So they can bring the ship back to Starfleet because they want to join Starfleet, and they're also, but they also want to do good stuff, and they've been sort of doing good deeds is a way of like, hey, I know we stole the ship, but look, we did all this good stuff too, so maybe don't be mad at us, which is very much a kid sort of attitude since this is a kid show and the protagonists are children. I think it works well. Yeah,
those characters ring true to me as well, for sure.
Well, I'm using the word casual fairly liberally.
Oh my goodness!
I would not. I don't really want to delve into go down that particular wormhole tonight.
Right.
But
so let me ask you a question. Because I'd ask both of you, but Joe, as you're relatively newer to this in a way than Leo and I are, do you have a favorite character amongst the main characters?
Oh, well, I'm going to be hard pressed to give you names. I can describe it because it is an education.
Right.
They are
right.
names, as we already determined.
Right.
I think I'm going to have to go for, if I had a favorite character just based on this, I think the young dude that has the spiky hair, the main guy.
Oh,
the captain.
Yeah, the one that he thought Starfleet won't know who I am, but they end up knowing who he is. But we stopped waiting to see. He intrigues me the most so far.
Right.
Close behind him, I think, would be the Medusan, just because of my recollection of the Is There Truth No Beauty episode of the
Right.
original series. I think that's
Right.
very intriguing to have her there, and as we'll get to in a minute, I know her interaction with the Borg was very interesting to me.
Yes. Yeah. I like the fact that they included a Medusan. I like that from the very beginning because you've never seen that again since TOS, so
Yeah.
I thought that
Right.
was a neat callback. And how about you, Leo? Does anybody else that
I
stand
do
out?
like the Medusa. I do like Zero. I think he's an interesting character. It's funny because we never really got a sense of what Medusans were like, other than that they were these like unearthly, creatures. And then, of course, the question is like, are people driven mad because they're so ugly or because they're so beautiful?
Right.
That is, that
Right.
was one of the things that come up in the old episode. Is there no truth in beauty?
Right.
It's interesting. I'm beginning to enjoy them all a little more. Dahl, I think he's improved. He's become less like the cocky like jerk that he sort of was in the beginning of the season.
Right.
And he's coming into his own because he's actually beginning to act like a captain, act like a leader,
Yeah.
looking at people. I do enjoy Jenkum Pog a lot too, our Tellarite engineer.
Yeah.
The fact that he talks about himself in the third person.
You're right.
And he's voiced by Jason Mantzoukas, who is a very talented comedic actor who is, I think, in his 40s. So it's sort of an odd idea that the rest of them are played by sort of younger actors.
Right.
For the most part, I believe.
Yeah.
And
But
then Jason Mantzoukas, who usually plays sort of like sexual deviants and weirdos. So he's an interesting choice casting wise. I mean, obviously he doesn't bring that quality to his performance.
No.
But it is sort of like, I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I like, I'm enjoying him. I'm enjoying them all. I think they're all beginning to sort of blossom in ways that I'm enjoying. So it's hard to put a favorite. I do much like Joe. I like the idea of a Medusan. That's sort of like a deep cut from TOS.
Yeah, I was thrilled to see that in the very first episode when they came out. When they found Zero and you knew what Zero was. I thought that was very cool. I also want to jump in just for a second. Scott Taylor gave us a thumbs up. Thank you, Scott. And of course, Ron, who's been commenting on the show as well. So that was terrific. Thank you so much for watching. I want to cut back in here and
update on the score.
All right. No. Well, Craig's got an inside joke, but Keith says mine is Gwen. Should have been the captain all along, in my opinion. Well, yeah.
Take?
She was the most capable going out. Lieutenant Ernie Hudson, Chief HR Officer. So the deep cut for Chris and myself and Craig.
I thought his name was Ernie Wilson.
Ernie Wilson. Yeah, Ernie Hudson is
the guy who played
the Ghostbusters.
In Ghostbusters, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Ernie Wilson was and he wasn't HR, he was the life support chief.
He was life support
or the USS Griffin. Yeah.
So,
under Craig's
captaincy.
Yes, under his command, yes.
Well, these two characters to me kind of invoke a Kirk Spock vibe in the first J.J. Abrams Trek movie in 2009.
Yeah.
Both were capable of being captain, qualified in different ways, and ultimately the better choice was Kirk for various reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but I overall I enjoyed this first episode.
Mm-hmm.
It sets up what the season's going to be about.
Mm-hmm.
So,
very true.
I'm going to give it a thumbs up. And let's.
Do we want to move on to
the
Borg?
I think that's a good, perfect segue.
Yeah, Let Sleeping Borgs Lie.
Great title.
Yeah, it is a great title. And that does lead me into what this other slide was, which is the Borg softened for kids. I did notice a couple of moments in it where, I mean, let's look at it this way. Okay. So they go on board, they discover what this device is that's on the ship that destroyed the relay station, and they try to figure out how to take it apart, and they can't. They can't figure out how to turn it off, how to destroy it. It protects itself. It's got all the other things going on. And then all of a sudden, the Borg cube shows up. And the Borg cube is in sort of hypersleep. You know, it's been shut down for a while, but it's loaded with, drones and so on.
Yeah.
And they don't know anything as kids. They don't know anything about the Borg. And the Hollow Janeway is saying, just go to warp now. Just get out of here. Go to warp now. Yeah. And then our main character says, well, wait a minute. If they've assimilated all these people, they might know how to take this apart. And so he comes up with this bold Boimler plan of going on board and trying to see if they can figure out how to take this weapon offline. Now, when the Borg start waking up, I'm just going to jump in because the Borg start to wake up eventually. There's two things. One, I liked the fact that it seems like every time you see the Borg now, everybody understands as adults and as Starfleet officers that you're going to get one or two phaser shots off.
Yeah.
Then you're going to have to remodulate your phasers because they remodulate to put shields up. Right?
Yeah.
And I like the fact that these kids didn't know to do that at all.
Yeah.
They shot at them once. They're like, oh, they're not so tough. And then the shields go up. And then that was it. Phasers weren't going to do them any good. So I liked that because it showed that they, as kids and not having been briefed on all of it, they wouldn't even know how to remodulate the phasers probably. I liked that. And I felt like they reacted like kids in this episode specifically. And I wish I had better notes on it, but there were several points in the episode where I really felt like they dealt with things from a kid's perspective, which I like.
That's for me. I like this episode a little bit better than the first. For that general reason. I mean, the reason they even just decided to penetrate the Borg ship and get the information was a childlike desire to stack up some brownie points for their eventual meeting with Starfleet.
Right. And curiosity, because kids are innately curious. Now, the one thing that bothered me a little bit, and I'm going to ask you guys if you think that this was them softening the Borg down for kids. Any drone can assimilate you.
Yeah.
They shoot tendrils out of their hands. They puncture your skin. Nanos go in, and the assimilation process starts.
Yeah.
In this episode, they round them all up and strap them to a machine.
Yes.
Awaiting being assimilated.
Yes.
And I don't know. Do you think that was done for the sake of the audience? Yep. Because is it more frightening that every guy you run into could turn you into a monster?
Well, also it's true because they don't have a red shirt, to sacrifice, so they could be horrified. You know, I do think they softened the Borg in this, because Zero goes in because they find the node of knowledge in the middle of the Borg cube, and you realize you have to sort of put yourself in one of their little stasis cubicles to get the information. So now the Borg are try to and successfully assimilate Zero, and I have a question of how that's possible, since Medusans are energy beings, and there is Borg seem very physical, very much of this world. So I'm not quite sure how they would do that.
Although her race, is a her. She sounds female to me, but I could be wrong. Zero could be. I don't know what Zero is, but let's just say Zero is part of a race that uses telepathy, and uses telepathy as part of a hive mind. I think, right?
Well, yeah, and she went directly into the hive mind, herself. They didn't reach out to her physically. She went right into her consciousness. Literally.
So I'm going to assume that's sort of the hand waving that we need to do there, is that it was mental.
I guess, I don't know. It's they're aware of her species because they called her species like 806.
Right. Yeah.
And
they knew it by name. They said Medusan, so they knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just question how what they if they take over the technology that allows her to fly around and not drive everybody crazy by her mere presence.
Right.
And they assimilated that, but it felt like they assimilated her because she's able to break through because Gwen is like, like, remember, you're part of something great, like you don't have to do this.
Right.
And it's the power of friendship is what brings Zero back.
Well, and they did something to her arms, to Zero's.
They gave
added
her
something there.
Yeah.
Orgy thing.
So I think here's the thing. On the one hand, it was cool to introduce the Borg to the universe of these characters.
Right.
The larger Star Trek, continuum. The Borg even as presented here would have terrified young Keith. They're. I mean, they slicked it down. It's funny because the Borg are very much like zombies in a way. They're
right.
these sort of mindless drones who bring you into their collective.
Right.
So I don't know. I feel like they sort of softballed the Borg.
Yeah. The Borg shows up and they're all asleep, number one.
Yeah.
So that, okay. So they have time, unlike other times we've seen people run into the Borg for the first time. They have time to learn about them a little bit from Janeway because they're not just showing up and saying you will be assimilated. So, although I don't know how the ship just got there.
I think because the Protostar is a smaller ship, a ship that could probably land on a surface. We've seen that they could go in and dock with it rather than, it's not as big as, let's say, a Galaxy class.
I thought that was a nice touch, by the way, just the way they just flew right on in.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
John,
the thing is,
the Borg would grab her since she's gas and light.
Yeah. That's.
Look, I think there's some plot holes here that could have been explained away by a few lines of dialogue. But to what extent do we need to explain this away to the target audience?
Right.
Probably not.
And there are, it leaves us with questions, but that's okay. We can speculate and write in some of the blanks ourselves. But in the grand tradition, I think of shows like, okay, there was Tales from the Crypt, then there was Tales from the Crypt Keeper, the animated version. Yeah. There was Little Shop, a cartoon version of Little Shop of Horrors. Well, of course, these are going to be modified for a young person audience.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I think we're seeing that here for sure.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys a question. And so you'll have a new iteration of Star Trek or a new series will come out. And then that series generally, starting with like, I don't know whether they did it so much in Next Gen, but they did it with Deep Space Nine and forward. You have a race or something that comes out and they're the bad guys for either that series or that season. This show has a lone big bad versus an alien race or a large group from some area. How do you guys feel about that? Do you think that that's also easier to digest for kids to have a villain? Is that a Star Wars tie-in in a way to have a main villain versus fighting the Kazon or fighting the Cardassians? Or what do you think about that?
I suppose you could see it that way, but I think this is less obvious a change for children in and of itself. I just think it's a more focused way to approach a villain. I mean, we have our Kanuni and Singh, we have other single villains that they weren't part of a bigger collective or alien race. So maybe it serves both purposes.
Well, and you are getting teased a little bit with this story that you get dribbles of his about how he feels his whole race went into a civil war because of first contact with the Federation. Right. So, and we don't really know what the story of that is yet. So it's kind of interesting if this is a first contact gone bad. We were talking in Lower Decks last week about the Operation Swing By, or the week before, about Operation Swing By, where it's like the Enterprise would show up, they'd make the first contact, and then 12 years would go by before anybody else came back.
Yeah.
We dropped old Khan off on SETI Alpha 5, and woo, we didn't see him for 25 years. So it's interesting. I think that's kind of a sophisticated storyline to go with if you're writing a story to introduce people to kids to Star Trek. I think.
Sure.
I don't know. What do you guys think? I think that's kind of interesting.
I think maybe there are two reasons. One, the bad guy is a grown-up. He's somebody's dad too. So it's sort of like, there might be like a time where you have a friend's dad who kind of intimidates all your friends, so that's very relatable for kids. Also, because Gwyn is not a bad person, even though her father is.
Right.
It shows that it's kind of very Star Trek message that you don't judge everybody by the behavior of one person. So it's I think it keeps. I think making the scale too large for kids might.
I want you to finish your point, but Keith had something interesting to say, which I want to jump to.
Having too large a scale might overwhelm the story, and then it raises questions that it can't necessarily answer.
Right.
Whereas if you've got a single villain, like you've got your Darth Vader, to bring it back to Star Wars,
right?
And it's sort of easier to focus your story on that. And a lot of kids shows are like that. There is a villain, there's a Skeletor, or what have you.
Yeah.
So what does Keith have to say?
Well, Keith, jumping back to what John was saying about how could they have connected her, and Keith's opinion was she was connected to the mind. The images of them grabbing her were happening in her mind.
Well, I could see that. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Spectacular things were going on in her mind. Now, he also has a theory. I have a theory for how this season is going to go. We have time travel shenanigans happening. The Civil War happened because the Diviner thought brought a device back in time that started the Civil War, and Starfleet got blamed for it.
Possibly. But it's interesting because if he goes back in time, you think you contact these people, but hey, Starfleet is going to show up, tell them to go fuck themselves.
Right.
Starfleet didn't start the Civil War, the Diviner did. It's quite possible. We only have his part of the story.
Right.
So it is. I think secrets will be revealed as we go along. So
yes.
Now that he's been rescued by the Dauntless, so we'll see what happens with that.
How did you like that when you see the body floating up there? And I kind of knew who it was. I don't know why it read for me, but then you just the face turns to the camera, and it's like.
I'm still curious what happened with Chakotay, and also was Chakotay the only person on that ship? Because while it's not as big as the Voyager or certainly the Enterprise,
right?
It does seem odd to send just one person off on this test flight. You think you would have some engineers?
I assume he's got a crew. I just thought he was the captain.
Yeah, I mean. What happened to him and what happened if there were other people, because it's a little unclear. Also, apparently it was a Chateau Picard bottle that they christened the
notice that.
Cool. I didn't see that. That's great.
So now is when I mentioned Keith not a fan of time travel.
Never has
been. It can be problematic.
Yes.
But
now I have and this is a very minor detail, I admit, but with the animated series, both this and Lower Decks, I'm wondering, why are there different uniforms for these single ships or single missions?
I don't know.
Apparently Starfleet likes there's a division in Starfleet responsible for uniforms, and when they come up with a new division, they were like, we're going to make unique uniforms for them. I don't know. I mean, I think it's to make sure that is sort of this blue and gray black sort of deal they're wearing.
It's almost Section 31-ish in a way, just because of its
covert.
mission.
But you know what? Maybe you've maybe you've stumbled on something a tiny bit there, Joe, because
Mhm.
the Protostar is an experimental ship.
Mhm.
And I don't know. Maybe that's why it's got that uniform with it. You're right. It's similar.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And one thing, and this is just
Just
an
needs the
aesthetic thing for me,
black
but
badge.
yeah, one thing I like about both the animated series is that they display the episode titles in the show. That really bugs me when in the live action shows they don't have the episode titles. I don't know why. I guess
Right.
it's just nostalgic me creeping through, but somehow it
Well,
seems
I
missing
love
from
that.
the
And
others.
I mean, when you think of TOS, you know, you always think of that opening shot,
Yeah.
whether it's of the Enterprise orbiting a planet or
Yeah.
something, and would have the name of the episode on it. I like that. Yeah.
Just a minor detail I'm missing in the live action stuff.
Yeah. 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 Because you're right. Surprisingly, they didn't do that in. If they were going to do it anywhere, they would have done it with Strange New Worlds, I think.
That's true.
Yeah, I was actually looking for it there since it had the more conventional
Right.
opening and so forth. you know.
Right.
Well, it's funny because we don't really see that. That is a convention that is not used much in TV anymore. Very rarely do you see a title of the episode on the screen.
Right.
So I think it's just because it is. I don't want to say it's passe, but it is not a convention currently in use. Is
Right.
probably why we're not seeing it.
Right. Right. I don't know.
But of course, in a lot of shows, including hour-long dramas, you don't really hardly see an opening anyway. You
Yeah,
just plaster opening credits over the action of the story right from the start. So
It's
Right.
funny. I as much I really like the opening theme for this, and the opening credits are beautiful, like
it's,
Yeah, they
it's
are.
gorgeous.
slick and beautiful. But every time I'm watching them, I'm like, they're too long. It's just
Yes.
too long.
Yeah, they are
Um,
too long.
And also I think for a lot of TV shows, they eschew the having opening credits because it means less time
To tell the
with their
story.
characters.
Right.
And also, the average length of a TV show now is shorter than it used to be,
Yeah.
Right.
because there are a lot more commercials.
Right.
So
Yeah, I noticed that too. I think the opening credits are very strange the way they're laid out for Andor. Completely off the subject, but you know how when you're watching things and you can say
skip. Yeah.
intro, right? Well, you skip intro on Andor, and all that means is you skip that thing with Darth
helmet.
Vader and Barton, blah 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 blah
Yeah.
blah blah blah, all those, which is cool. I think that's a
Yeah.
very cool graphic. But that's what you skip, and then you're still stuck watching the name Andor come morphing out of darkness and at you, and
Yeah.
it takes forever,
Although that doesn't take as long. It's not as long as the opening for
No, it's not. But I can do without the name Andor morphing at me like that. I love the show. Don't get me wrong.
Okay.
I absolutely love the show. I'm completely obsessed with it.
You
But-
know, certain details will affect you certain ways.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
just
well, and the fact that you can't
pleasure
skip that
viewing.
damn thing really annoys me.
Well, it's short enough that you it doesn't work. I wish I could
Okay.
skip
All right.
the opening of the Prodigy, because it's just like, oh my god, okay, we get it. It's
Yeah, well, I cannot debate you there.
but overall I'm enjoying it. I'm curious to see how, because apparently both Klingons and Romulans are going to show up this season,
Oh,
from
cool.
what I understand. So I don't know what next week's episode is going to be about.
I don't know, but we do have the title. We'll have it in advance because they put all the titles out on a list.
Yeah.
So
So
I have that somewhere. I don't know.
I
Well,
think
maybe the appearance of Klingons and Romulans will partially answer your question, Chris, about whether we're going to focus on single villains versus a
Right,
villainous race
right,
or
right,
something in between, maybe.
right, right. Well, and there's an interesting point. Klingons, especially,
Mhm.
are allies of the Federation. Actually, they're part of the Federation, aren't they?
well, they're allies. They're like, because they're
Yeah.
still the Klingon Empire, but they're autonomous, but allied.
But wouldn't you suspect by this point that there is some Federation tech in their ships?
That's a good question, whether they are going to avoid it.
Will they be susceptible to damage from the device that's in the processor?
That's a good
Yeah.
question. And are these and there's the occasional rogue Klingon, as we've seen more than once, who like wants to bring back the glory of the Empire. And
if you could hire Christopher Lloyd to play a Klingon, go for it.
yes,
but was it the first? I think you saw more evidence of that real coalition in the very first Klingon appearance in Next Generation, which I believe is a Matter of Honor.
Oh, well, there's two. There's like three sort of rogue Klingons.
Right.
Yeah, but you saw a transmission from the Klingon Defense Force, which you never heard mentioned again.
Right.
And there was the Federation and the Klingon symbols behind them.
That's true. It
but
is.
I think they made it more of what Lee was talking about not long after that, saying, no, they're just an allied government. They're not.
Yeah, they're
intermingled
like two great powers who tie their fortunes together.
Right.
So I think that they had the idea, but they didn't quite know the extent of what it was going to be, as of the writing of that episode.
And I'm sorry, that episode was actually called Heart of Glory. I just remember.
Heart of Glory.
Yeah.
It's one where, and also you realize why it's like, why do the security officers guarding people in the brig always give their back to the door?
I just watching those suckers
to be killed by escaping, prisoners.
But I want to get the correct title out there before either Craig or Keith corrected me. So
yes,
no,
for the glory. That is, it's a rare. Was it that a first season episode? I believe it was.
That was the very first season, first episode.
First season episodes.
First Klingon other than Worf on the Next Generation. Yeah.
But
I don't know.
And
so, it's part of canon, so it could, what we're talking about now with Prodigy and the mysterious weapon, it could affect them in ways we can't anticipate.
Here's an interesting idea: is apparently Romulan ships don't use warp cores, where Federation Klingon ships use a singularity as their warp source, much like the Protostar, which has this not a singularity, but it has some sort of dwarf star as their power.
I don't really fully understand that, but
I don't either. But I know if Craig is still with us, if he has any thoughts on how that works, let us know.
Well, he just said the
Klingon Defense Force was defunded. Yeah,
I love that explanation.
Well,
but overall, I'm enjoying this new half of the season so far.
Yeah, I am too.
I've nits to pick, but that's just like nerdy stuff that I'm like, yeah, well, maybe, but I can put it aside. Like I said,
we're not beyond nerdy stuff.
We're not, but I don't. I also feel like that stuff can also prevent you from really enjoying what you're watching.
Well, yeah, that's true.
So
my favorite movie critic when he was alive was Roger Ebert, and the reason for that was he would critique movies based on what the movie is trying to be. That's why Gone with the Wind and Top Gun could have 4 stars in his view, because he wasn't comparing them against each other.
Right.
By the same token, this is its own animal, so to speak.
And like I said, I think as an introduction for Star Trek introduction for younger viewers, it's a good win because they're just like parsing out bits here and there. Like every week, here's a little more, and it's not like, oh well, let me tell you about Star Trek. Well, it started with Kirk and Spock and McCoy and the Enterprise, and that was TOS. And it's overwhelming. It's too much. But if you say, hey, here are characters who are discovering it along with you,
right?
Then they'd be like, oh, there are. You'd be like, so there are other Star Trek shows. Yes, there are. Would you like to see? You were like, and you maybe show them TNG, and then or TOS, or and you slowly get them in, and then they start taking it in on their own.
Right.
So it's a protostar that powers the same name protostar. Sounds cool, but basically cool sounding technobabble nonsense. Well,
but hey, that sounds cool.
Like a lot of, much like most Star Trek technology, it's a little. Don't look at it too closely.
Right.
So.
No, I agree, though. I mean, it's
I'll take out my Bajaran tricorder.
There you
Yeah.
go.
which I paid $12 for, mind you, on sale.
Oh wow. No, I think both these episodes. I'm glad I watched them back to back earlier today.
Yeah.
You know what? Again, going back to the fact that what does it set out to do? Who is the target audience? And can it appeal to people outside that target audience? I think it succeeds on all those levels, and for that reason, I'm intrigued. I'm interested in seeing more.
Yeah. I think we've got. Well, let's look at it this way, guys. We're 6 minutes over an hour.
That's
So
okay.
I guess we did find something to talk about because
Yes.
6 minutes over. Now we did talk about 2 episodes,
Yes.
and I'm going to assume that we're going to come back next week and just talk about the next episode
Yes.
rather than skipping a week or something silly like that. But yeah, no, there's definitely stuff here for us to talk about. I think, and I think it's an entertaining story. I definitely want to know what's going to happen. I want to know the full story of the diviner and his civilization and what that's all about and why he blames Starfleet. And I want to know, whether these, I'm going to assume that these kids end up getting to Starfleet.
At some point, find a way to communicate
Yeah.
with them without,
Right.
self-destructing, setting off a chain of self-destruction that would
Yeah.
decimate Starfleet.
And somehow or other, that device has to have an off switch.
It's got to be something. I mean, my solution would be find another ship and just, have this one pilot itself into a sun.
Right.
But
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and as I see it, Chris and Leo, there are 2 very good reasons to press forward with Prodigy and Trek Tonight as a whole. You know what? Let's see where it goes. Let's see what how intriguing it will get. There's some good mysteries here that we want to see resolved, and the most important reason of all, I want to continue to see Chris's daughter dance with us at the end of the show.
There you go. Well, I don't know whether I think she may have fallen asleep.
Oh no! Well, maybe
checking
we need to give her some dancing time at the beginning.
Yeah, I was checking to see before, and I didn't get an answer. Let's see. Does Penny want to dance? And then years later, I can be accused of forcing my child to dance on a program, and that's why I was a terrible father.
Well, you can only live for today sometimes, Chris.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll be the Bing Crosby of my day.
Well, then you have a granddaughter if you're a Bing Crosby, then you'll have a granddaughter on a future Star Trek series for 10 weeks.
That's right. That's exactly.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, here she comes.
All right.
All right, guys. We're ready to get out of here. Hang on. I'm in there. What? Okay, but you got to let me still technical direct here, honey. I still got to get it out of the show. At any rate, thank you guys all so much for watching. I'm loving the fact we've got some new people seem to be tuning in every week. Thank you so much.
Great.
Yes, thank you very much.
Again, remember you can always subscribe to it. Hang on, honey. You can always subscribe to us on Twitch. Covering the mouth of a child. Isn't that wonderful? Once again, and go Phillies. Let's hope they win the World Series.
Yeah,
and
Phillies.
Go Phillies.
All
That's
right.
And at any rate, we will see you next week for the next installment on Prodigy. And look to the website, the Facebook page for more information about that. So long, guys. Have a great week.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
All right. See you.
Good night, guys.
Good night.